Beneath Seoul's reign and silence, a daughter's return to a mansion of secrets, love lost, and the unraveling truth that redefined everything she thought she knew. The city lights of Seoul flickered like stars, casting faint glows over the darkened streets. I stood beneath the rain, its cold fingers tracing down my cheeks like memories long buried. My coat clung to me, soaked through, but I barely noticed. I had eyes only for the mansion before me, my childhood home. It looked exactly as I remembered, and yet utterly unfamiliar. The tall iron gates, once a symbol of prestige, now stood like the bars of a cage. The windows were dim, some shuttered completely, and ivy had begun to creep across the once immaculate stone facade. It was less a house now and more a mausoleum, a place where something precious had died. It had been 10 years. 10 years since I walked away from the lies, from the cold stares, from the suffocating expectations. 10 years of pretending Europe had made me whole. And now, here I was again, chasing shadows I thought I had escaped. I told myself I came for closure. But as I took that first step through the gates, my heels clicking softly against the cobblestone path, I felt a hollow echo inside me. Closure? That word sounded like a fairy tale. The house opened for me like a wound, quiet and vast. The same grand staircase stretched out before me, the polished wood catching the faint light like a whisper of the past. The chandelier above looked untouched, but dust clung to its crystals like ghosts refusing to move on. I moved through the silence, my footsteps the only sound. The scent of jasmine lingered over my mother's favorite flower, but my mother was gone. Everything felt faded, as if the house had aged in its own grief during my absence. Each creak of the floor beneath my feet reminded me of footsteps long gone. My father's stern walk, Madame Han's quiet glide, and me, forever the outsider in my own home, trailing behind them in silence. The staircase groaned as I ascended, one hand gliding along the banister. My fingers trembled. I wasn't just returning to a place. I was peeling back the skin of an old wound, daring to touch the infection beneath. The hallway was dim, lit only by a few antique sconces. At the very end stood a door to my father's study. I hesitated there. That room had been the center of everything. The betrayals, the whispered arguments, the decisions that shaped my life without my consent. I remembered the day I last stood before this door. The day I learned that love could be conditional. That family, for some, was just another battlefield. I gripped the handle and pushed. The study was darker than I remembered. Heavy curtains blocked out the night. The only illumination came from a desk lamp, casting a golden halo over scattered papers. Everything else remained frozen in time. The shelves of dusty books, the leather chair, and the portrait above the fireplace. That painting always unnerved me. The ancestor's gaze was too knowing. I stepped inside. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. I moved to the desk and ran my hand over the surface, my skin brushing against old ink and forgotten dust. That's when I saw an envelope, aged and worn, its corners curled. My father's handwriting greeted me like a blow to the chest, precise, controlled, cold. I opened the letter. As I read, the words bled into me, each sentence unraveling a truth I had never been told. Decisions made without me, sacrifices demanded in silence, control disguised as protection. It wasn't remorseful, just a record of calculated cruelty. And in the end, I had been the cost. I didn't notice the door creak until I felt the shift in the air behind me. My body tensed, still clutching the letter. I knew who it was before I turned. Kim Min-jun. He stepped inside with that quiet confidence that had once drawn me to him. Time had not been gentle with him. His once boyish face had hardened, lines of exhaustion etching themselves beside his eyes. He was thinner, sharper. But those eyes, those conflicted, searching eyes, were the same. He spoke my name like it was both a prayer and a curse. So-hyun. I turned to face him, keeping the letter close to my chest like armor. We stood in the same room where we had once shared secrets, where I had once believed in him, before everything fractured. I didn't come here for you, I said, my voice more steely than I felt. He didn't flinch, but a shadow crossed his features. Then why are you here? I didn't answer. How could I? How do you explain returning to the scene of your emotional death? Min-jun moved closer, his steps measured. I heard you were back, he said. I didn't think you'd return to this place. I had no choice, I whispered, my eyes dropping to the letter again. There are things I need to understand. He looked at me then, not with judgment, but with sorrow. Do you think your father left behind answers? Or just more questions meant to haunt you? Maybe both, I thought. Maybe the answers would only hurt more than the silence ever did. I didn't realize I was trembling until Min-jun reached out and gently took the letter from my hand. His touch was brief but warm, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. And in that breathless moment of stillness, I saw something unspoken between us. still alive. The mansion around us felt smaller now, like it too was waiting to exhale. Minjun's presence lingered behind her like a shadow, not oppressive, but unshakably familiar. The letter in his hand trembled slightly, not from him, but from the weight it carried. So-hyun could see it in the way his eyes scanned the page, the slow realization that dawned on his face. He understood now what had been stolen from her, what she had lost in silence. She turned away, her gaze drifting to the window. Through a gap in the curtains, she could make out the garden below, the same garden where her mother used to sit on warm afternoons, sketching with a fragile calm that So-hyun only now recognized as survival. Madame Han had tried to erase that presence, but some scents, some colors, were impossible to destroy completely. The room felt heavier now. Her past, once a fog, was starting to take shape, jagged and sharp. She left the study without another glance, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Behind her, Minjun didn't follow. Whether out of respect or guilt, she didn't know. The hallway led her to another room, her old bedroom. The door creaked open and she stepped inside, uncertain of what she expected. The room had not been touched, the same canopy bed draped in ivory lace, the desk still scattered with old books and dried-out pens. Even the porcelain doll in the corner remained, eyes wide open, lips frozen in a silent scream. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing under her weight. Here time had stopped. Her fingers grazed the edge of the mirror on her vanity, and for a moment she looked at her reflection not as a woman, but as the child she had once been. The child who had listened at keyholes, waiting to be acknowledged. The child who had cried into her pillow while the adults around her plotted futures that didn't include her happiness. The tears came without warning, quiet, warm, and relentless. She didn't wipe them away. Downstairs, the sound of a door opening jolted her. It was not Minjun this time. The steps were lighter, more deliberate. Madame Han. The very thought of her sent a chill up So-hyun's spine. That woman's presence had always been a paradox, subtle yet suffocating. She had been the perfect wife, the elegant hostess, the embodiment of propriety. But beneath the surface was a cruelty so refined it could only be called deliberate. So-hyun didn't go to her. She didn't need to. If the past had taught her anything, it was that the truth always found its way to the surface. Instead, she made her way to the hidden room behind the study. Her father's private archive is off limits to everyone, even Madame Han. She remembered the day she'd discovered it, years ago. She'd been 12, following the sound of an argument through the walls, when she'd seen the false panel swing open. It had been her secret ever since. Inside, the air was musty. Old files, journals, legal papers, and every piece of her father's empire were catalogued here, behind lock and key. But So-hyun wasn't searching for wealth or power. She was looking for the thread that unraveled everything. It didn't take long. Tucked in a leather-bound ledger was a folder marked with her mother's initials. Her heart skipped. Inside were hospital records, correspondence, and even a will. But the truth hit her with a violence she hadn't expected. Her mother hadn't died of illness as they had claimed. She had been institutionalized by her own husband under the guise of hysteria, and Madame Han had signed as a witness. So-hyun clutched the papers, her hands trembling. Her mother had been silenced, her existence rewritten. Everything, the coldness, the secrets, the disdain, it all made sense now. They had needed her mother out of the way to secure the Han family's position. And So-hyun, the daughter of that erased woman, had been a living inconvenience. She returned to the study, face pale, the folder in her arms. Minjun was still there, sitting in her father's chair, the letter on the desk. His gaze met hers and then dropped to the documents. She laid them down without a word. He read quickly. She watched his expression shift from confusion to horror. So-hyun didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth stood between them, now undeniable, irreversible. The sound of footsteps drew their attention. Madame Han stood at the doorway, composed as always, but there was something brittle in her posture. Her eyes flicked to the folder, then to So-hyun. For the first time in her life, So-hyun saw something unfamiliar in those eyes. Fear. She didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching the woman unravel. Just an overwhelming grief for everything that had been lost. For the mother who had suffered in silence, and for the girl who had grown up in a lie. That night, the mansion didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a graveyard, yes, but one where the dead had finally been acknowledged. Minjun stayed until dawn. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. In the silence, So-hyun found a kind of peace she hadn't known she needed. Not closure, but clarity. When the sun rose, casting golden light through the curtains, she knew it was time to leave again. Not to run, but to begin. She packed nothing. The house would stay behind, with all its ghosts. She walked through the gates as the first light warmed the city. The rain had stopped. The city had woken. And so had she.